Good evening. I call the Owen J. Roberts working session of October 9th, 2023 to order. The Owen J. Roberts School District Board of Directors utilizes the working session process as a way to consider agenda items as one large committee for the purposes of discussion and debate in full view of the public. Time permitting, the committee chairperson may open the meeting up for public questions on items being discussed by the committee at the time. Curriculum and Special Education Committee, Mrs. Sabo.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Tonight we're going to review the data from our PSSA's Keystones IB and AP course review from last year. Dr. Soder and a few of our principals from middle school, high school, and elementary will be presenting that data. The data is available now online for the community and anybody that would like to take a look at it. There is some that was removed that the board had access to because it could be potentially identifying information. So the PASAs, WIDA, is that how you say it? And some of the AP courses were condensed. So we didn't identify teachers and students within those classes. The board did get all the data. We've had ample time to review it and take a look over it. And we will tonight see a presentation on the pros, cons, and what we're doing about it. Thank you very much, Dr. Soder.
Great. So, Dr. Cicito, are you putting the presentation up for us? Super, thanks so much. Okay, so we wanted to get started with this and talk about some of the highlights, and then we're going to have three of our administrators share with you some specific information relative to high school, middle school, and our elementary program. And just wanted to give you sort of a look forward that we expect sometime in October that the Department of Education will refresh the Future Ready Index site. That's the public site where you can see information about every school in the Commonwealth. And so we will let you know when that occurs. And at Mrs. Sabo's suggestion, we're going to be actually making a few videos to make that a little bit easier to navigate for each of our schools. As well, you know that our annual report has information for Keystone, PSSA, AP, and IB data, but this will give you just a little bit of a summary of those tests. So if you can go to the next slide. So some of our highlights that you're going to hear about tonight, we've had increased enrollment, higher test scores for some of our AP and IB courses at the high school. At the middle school and actually at the elementary level for PSSA, all of our students advanced or had higher scores in mathematics from the previous year for PSSA. And for middle school, of course, our students who take that Keystone Algebra 1 in grades 6 and 7 remain at a very high proficient and advanced level. Elementary had high growth. We're actually able to see that already. And as I say, I believe that that will be released to the public probably by the end of the month. We saw that in science in 2 of our buildings, in mathematics in 1 building, and then in all of the areas at 2 of our schools. So plenty of good things for our school data. And then if you could move to the next slide. So before I turn this over to Mr. Kohler, one of the requests from the board was this specific data related to our Keystones. Mrs. Munson had asked for what would be sort of our best estimate if we had had all of our eligible students testing in algebra. And so that's my best estimate for where that would have landed, just sort of based on our percent of students who are typically successful on that test for the given grades. But as we talked about previously, many students, probably over 150, were exempt from taking that test in 2020 who are now ready to graduate. And so those student test scores are not part of our Algebra 1 Keystone results for the class of 2023, or excuse me, class of 2024. Okay, and I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Kohler, who's going to talk with you about the rest of the information for the high school.
All right, let's see. Are we good on this, Dr. Cicita? First run with the brand new microphone. Perfect. Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. Obviously, with the high school data, we have a ton of different data sets, a lot of information available to us. So I'm going to just hit a very broad survey of what we have access to. And the first thing up here is our Keystone data. So a few of the things that stand out with regards to Keystone data. And I think just a reminder that Keystone data has a dual purpose now for us at the high school. One is looking at those proficiency levels and where those cohorts land. The other component of it now over the course of the last 2 years is Keystone graduation requirements. And so in the past, the Keystone data didn't have a lot of direct applicability to individual students. Now those Keystones are really, really important as students strive towards those Keystone graduation requirements. With regards to performance, I think generally speaking, we're very happy with proficiency levels. Biology and English language arts continue to significantly outperform state averages. Algebra 1 is above the state average, even with the COVID data missing. As Dr. Soder said, we're missing 171 scores there because those students have non-numeric proficiency because they would have taken the exam in the year that COVID had canceled the exam. So we would expect, obviously, that that's a little bit higher. But again, overall, we feel pretty good about the general performance. We're also excited about our adoption of Linkit. All of our students in those Keystone Trigger courses had an opportunity to take 3 different Linkit assessments last year, which were not just predictive of how students performed on the actual Keystone exams, but also gave our teachers vital data at different checkpoints over the course of the year to be able to modify instruction in response to what we were getting from that. And that's something we just didn't have before with regards to the measures we had in place. And even from the Keystone data itself, it doesn't give us a ton of great information about how to actually modify instruction and support students. And we feel really good about what we're getting with those Linkit benchmarks. The piece that is still certainly on our mind here at the high school is growth. Proficiency numbers look good. Our 5-year PVOS growth trend lines, particularly with regards to ELA and algebra, have not been as strong as we compare ourselves to other schools in the area. And so this is something that we are looking at. We've had a renewed focus this year on collaboration and instructional planning. And that is the work that we are trying to do, is make sure that our students not only are coming in at a high point, but are continuing to achieve at a high point and continuing to move up in relation to what we're seeing from peer schools. So the next thing that I want to look at is our international baccalaureate data. And so with regard to IB, we previously did have a couple of tables up here. We decided to pull those out just because of the identifying information in that. But overall, again, we're really happy with the direction of the IB program. Both the valedictorian and the salutatorian in the class of 2023 came from the IB program, which I think is a great testament to the type of student that pulls in. But it's also a really diverse program. And we've got students kind of all across the academic spectrum that participate in that program. And that's one of the things that we really enjoy about it. Last year, we also went through our 5-year IB program audit, which was our first time going through that audit, got a tremendous amount of feedback as part of that. And one of the things that we're really focused on this year with regards to IB is just greater collaboration for staff and for students. And another component of the data that stood out to us, last year, our cohort was a pretty small cohort, again, significantly impacted by COVID and our recruitment efforts. Our class this year, we have 27 CP candidates in the graduating class. And the class below that has 23 candidates at this time. So the program has rebounded. We think that that's kind of that sweet spot for the program right now. And we're really excited to kind of have a full cohort in both of those grades. And then the last data set is the advanced placement data. And with regard to AP, again, we have for a ton of different courses, so there's a lot to look at, but I think just 3 big things that stood out to me on the positive side of things. Number one, with regards to credit, there were 3 courses where every student in the class earned a 3 or higher on the AP test. And so to have a course where every student going in comes out with an opportunity to get some college credit, I think is a real testament to the work that those students and those teachers are doing with one another. With regards to performance, many of our courses have students that are significantly exceeding both PA and global averages in those exams. Again, if you dive into the data, you can see where those stand out, but in some cases scoring like a full half point above PA averages and global averages, which I think is fantastic. And then lastly, with participation, we had 3 different courses that required 3 or more sections, which I think is great. We don't just want, the highest performing students taking AP classes. We want students who are willing to push themselves to step in and have an experience in a college level class before they graduate. And to have 3 different classes that require 3 or more sections, I think is really wonderful. So ultimately, we ended up with 399 unique students who took 699 exams last year, which we feel good about. And we're going to continue to push. And again, try to stretch students because we would really love as many students as possible to have an opportunity to take a college level class here in a safe space before they actually go off onto a college campus.
Mr. Colbert, if my math is correct, 399 students means about somewhere between 20 and 25% of our high school student body took an AP class last year.
Correct, yes.
Right.
Yeah, it's right about 22%. And then in terms of areas of focus, a couple of things that stood out. Our Calc BC students did really, really well last year, but in some of our upper level math and science classes at the AP level, we saw a little bit of a regression compared to what we were accustomed to seeing previously. There's a number of different variables, so there's not like one thing that we can directly attribute that to, but that's something that we're keeping our eye on to see, which of those variables we think some of those are just going to naturally work their way out. And so we don't have any direct interventions in class, but that's something that we're keeping our eye on. And then another piece is just when we look at some of our world language participation, we would like to get more students that we are pushing all the way up to that college level. And so that's another thing that we're looking at is how we kind of keep that pipeline open and make sure that we're giving as many students an opportunity to pursue world languages all the way up through. But like I said, generally speaking, we are very, very happy with our data. There are always points that we can improve on, and we are using this as our focus areas, but overall we feel good about where the high school is at.
With regards to that, honors calculus does not adequately prepare students
Yes.
for the AP calculus exam. So are you saying that there are students who take honors calculus and then take the AP exam without being in an AP calculus class?
So last year we had a group of students that approached us. It's not something that we typically did, but again, there were 10 students who were interested in doing that. We gave them the opportunity to do that. 6 of those students scored a 1, 4 of those students scored a 2, which was just an indicator that, like, despite an honors calculus class being really rigorous, it is not going to replicate what you're getting in an advanced placement course. And that we really want to make sure that if you are intent on taking that exam, that you move into that AP course right from the start of the year. And that's a course that you're taking because we know that will better prepare you for that exam.
Okay, so guidance counselors are going to flag that if somebody goes into honors calculus and seems like they want a post-secondary education that is very math heavy, that the guidance counselor might warn them at the course selection time? Is that how it's going to be handled?
Probably more so than the counselor would be the math teacher themselves and having those conversations around recommendations. And if a student really wants to push themselves into that, then encouraging them to take that class, recognizing that it's going to be a big lift and it's going to be a lot of work. But if they really are intent on taking that exam, then we want them to take the course because that's going to give them the best opportunity to succeed.
So we will not be making changes to the honors level calculus course
No.
to make it more in line with AP.
No.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a couple questions. Regarding the 5-year PBOS growth trend there. It says here that a renewed focus on instructional planning and collaboration. Can you give us some details of what that really means and what changes are being made? What's that look like?
Sure. So we have pretty limited professional development time. But what we've done is we've really taken advantage of that time that we have this year to hold that sacred and to be instructional professional development. So during our monthly time right now, we've got teachers that are collaborating with one another at course levels who have set goals for Q1 and have a couple of different checkpoints now that they have an opportunity to sit together to work together as a content team as they are working toward that. On our larger PD days, the first of which is coming up on November 7th, in working with Dr. Soder and the curriculum team, they have been kind enough to really hold that morning sacred for us so that we're not pulling teachers into other trainings and that we have a big chunk of time set aside that morning for teachers to be able to look at data, to reflect on what they're seeing, and then ultimately to action plan with one another. And that's just those aren't things that we've had time to really hold sacred and to prioritize in the past. And so we're really taking advantage of the professional development time that we have this year and utilizing that for instructional planning.
Okay. Also, it says here that 3 courses, all the students did a 3 or above.
Mhm.
Can you give us an idea of roughly how many AP courses run in a typical year? So I know how much 3 is, if, you know,
Yeah, I was gonna,
because obviously we know how many students and we know how many exams, but how many courses are there?
unique courses, we're looking somewhere in the 20 to 22 range.
Okay. And then, and all those currently run every year. We don't have any that run every other year or anything like that.
We don't have any that are scheduled to run every other year, but we do have some that don't run. Last year, I think last year it was AP Chemistry didn't run, but this year AP Chemistry is running. So it kind of depends on where student interest is. But we don't have anything right now that is scheduled to be running on like odd years or even years.
Okay. And then finally, I'm just curious about just AP classes in general. I know that, you know, a student could take AP something, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it translate to a college credit,
Mhm.
even if they do whatever on the test. Do we track that so that students have an idea of how likely it is if they take X classes, whether that would be of use to them or not, or whether or not they would just be having to repeat that class in college anyway? You know, because like, for an example, my kids all took AP music theory. Well, music schools don't accept AP music theory.
Right.
So they, you know, they still have to take music theory in college. But I'm wondering about other courses. Are there other similar things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start talking big picture, then I'll let Dr. Soder kind of work in. Every school is really unique in what they're going to accept, and in terms of what credit they are, what level of credit they are going to accept. And so, our kind of push for students is not just that like you're taking this class to get college credit, but to have the experience of a college level class. And in some circumstances, you may have a school that gives you credit for it, or in other circumstances, you may have a school that passes you out of the intro level course, but is still going to require that you take 4 different math classes, but you get to start on a higher level. That sort of information is available in Naviance. I mean, there's colleges that push that out there. Again, counselors have some working knowledge of that just from their work with students over the course of the years in terms of what colleges count what classes. But I don't think, we don't have anything that's kind of like a painting with a broad brush that says like this school is only going to take this class and all of that. We just try to encourage students to know that the value is taking a college level class, and then once you apply and get accepted, we'll kind of see where your academic profile fits with what they're going to have available for you.
Are students ever pushed towards just dual enrollment instead? I'm just curious just about the whole AP system in general and how, the value of it as far as, because I noticed on some of those tests, some of them only have a handful of kids taking them, which is fine. But I'm just curious about our philosophy basically of, is it better to take an AP course than taking the college class itself, or do counselors deal with that or not?
Yeah, I think the counselors do that and provide that guidance. I think, again, it depends on what your outcome is. If you are 100% looking for the college credit, then it's definitely better to take a dual enrollment course because you have a guarantee of coming out of that with that credit. But I will say that there are some perception issues with dual enrollment, and a student would much rather take an advanced placement course than take a dual enrollment course through a community college because they believe that the perception of that won't be that it is as rigorous or held in as high value if they're applying to an Ivy League institution as having taken an AP class, which isn't necessarily the case, but that's the perception. This is part of a larger conversation, but I think right now, not that I think, like, we are actively reevaluating what we're doing with dual enrollment because the landscape with dual enrollment is changing right now. And we are kind of recalibrating our efforts in terms of what we're going to do with that. And again, I just think that IB attracts some students, AP attracts some students, dual enrollment attracts some students. What we want to do is we want to make sure that students know what is available to them and then are empowering them to make the decision that's right for them.
Right. And last question, I promise,
Yeah.
for you. Do we weight dual enrollment? How do we weight grades with dual enrolled courses?
Dual enrollment's weighted at the same level as an AP or an IB level course. If you're taking a college level course, then it is weighted as a college level course.
Okay, great, thanks.
And part of that came out of the state mandate that was adopted last year that all dual enrollment courses needed to be at the AP weight in terms of a school's grading scale.
The only thing that I was going to add about the AP credit was not only does it vary institution to institution, it varies within a major. So some majors you have to have a different score for that same test compared to other majors. So it's unique to every school.
Steve, I think it's great what a variety of AP courses we offer, but we've talked about how challenging the schedule makes it for kids to get into everything they'd like to, especially if you're a late bloomer and like you decides in the middle of sophomore year, I should take some higher level coursework, because I really want to get into a good college now. You talked about how we might be looking at some options of varying the schedule to make some of these courses more accessible. Maybe in the spring, you could give us an update on those efforts.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something that we're looking at now, from doing scheduling, I guess, over the course of the last 16 years, like we've yet to find the golden unicorn. Like scheduling, there's always a trade-off. And when you push in one direction, you're pulling in another. But it is something that's on our mind right now. And we are looking to try to find ways to make sure that as many students have as many opportunities as possible. In something like AP classes, when you're running, of those 20 to 22, several of them are only running one section to try to get 1,800 students that get a combination that works for them is a challenge.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kind of off of that, and then also going back to the honors calculus, was the reason that those 10 students didn't take AP calculus related to access? Was there not enough room for them to take the AP? Or
Nope.
they just chose? Okay.
No, it wasn't an access issue. I think it was a group of students that had a really positive experience in that course. Felt like they were getting a really rigorous experience and kind of wanted to benchmark themselves and see where they stood.
Just one last comment. The exam, it's very hard to get into an upper level college without AP courses all over your transcript. And so kids are probably accepted before the results of the AP exams come back. So it's more important that you're in a number of these AP courses for some of the universities than if you're actually going to get credit or if they're going to look at, did you get a 5 or a 4 on it? So that's just another point with that.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, based on one of the questions earlier about the institutions that accept the AP courses, if you go to the AP website, you can put in the institution you're interested in. So just on my computer, I pulled up Penn State, and it tells you which courses Penn State accepts and what score you need to have on the AP exam in order for them to accept it. So, so kids have to do some research on their own. I'm sure our counseling office is aware of that, but I was putting on my high school principal hat, former high school principal hat, and I used to be aware of that. So.
Well, my daughter discovered one more thing, which is that she maxed out on the total number of AP credits she could get coming into her school. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Mr. Stolfitz?
Good evening, everyone. The conversation shifts a little bit from AP and IB when you get to middle school, and really we have percentage for the Keystone, and then our main focus really at the middle school level are the PSSA exams. So just a bit of a summary here for middle school that you can see. Our Keystone performance remains high for our students, especially those accelerated students who are coming in and taking algebra and completing the algebra course in 7th grade. They're in the upper 90% for their performance, proficient advanced. So we're very pleased with that. PSSAs, we have seen some improvement, some growth in mathematics. The ELA data showed slight increase, but something to keep an eye on for sure. The Linkit data is something that we're really diving into much more deeply between last year and this year, as we're now in our 2nd year using Linkit as a predictor, and we apply those benchmarks in math, ELA, and science 3 times per year. So as you can see here, that we use those as a deterrent app, but also the information that it provides to us allows us to then relook at areas that we need to improve upon with our instruction, areas that are showing weaknesses. We have made some adjustments to our schedule this year to allow those teachers in specific subject areas to also get together and go through that data. In the case of ELA, for example, they've been provided within the last 2 weeks, and we're trying to turn that around as quickly as we can as well. So in the last 2 weeks, we've had our ELA teachers provided with some coverage during the day. They've had 2 half days to go through and grade TDAs as a group. So instead of one ELA teacher grading her TDAs in her room by herself somewhere and someone else in another room by themselves somewhere, they can come together and talk about the matrix they're going to use, what they're going to, how they're going to rate, and whether an answer does fall within a higher grade on the matrix or not. So that common information is good, and those conversations that take place in that setting is good as well. We've also, at the end of each math session, after each math benchmark, our academic coach is providing data folders to math teachers with immediate feedback on what the results were from the Linkit data for mathematics. And with that data, they can clearly see, okay, here's an area where we need to make sure we hit upon. Some students did okay here, but again, the thing to remember also is that the Linkit test, those benchmarks are benchmarks on what they should be learning at the end of the given grade they're in right now. So it's expected that early in the year, their grades should be a bit lower because they haven't been exposed to as much. And as they move through the year, they get exposed to more of that information. And so the expectation is that we continue to show growth throughout the year. We become much more purposeful with how we're using that data in Linkit and providing teachers opportunities to go through that information and separate it out as well. So when we talk about the focus areas for the middle school, I just kind of hit on assessment and how we're using Linkit. IXL is also, now we use IXL in more subjects than just the math ELA. We actually use it in some foreign language courses as well for students to, you can kind of pinpoint, and it's a really student driven. So it meets the students where they are in their development and in their knowledge. So if you have 10 students in a room and they go on to IXL that night at home, each one of those 10 students may be working on a different thing, depending on where they are in their growth or what their areas of weakness may be. That's determined within IXL. So it really is specific to the child and meets them where they are. Our advisory time and has been moved to the morning. One thing we noticed last year, one thing we felt last year was by having our advisory time, and it says advisory, it's last year we called it our win, what I need period. It's really a homeroom. It's a half-hour block of time, which is the time where students can get remediation. They can meet with teachers if they need some extra help. Enrichment can take place if they're gifted students, for example, that could take place during that time. But one thing we noticed last year with having it at the end of the day, we've had it at the end of the day for a number of years, was that by the end of the day, the students were spent after their period 8 instructional period. We were then asking them to go to another period where we expected them to kind of dive in and work on IXL or meet with teachers or get some tutoring or work with peers. And by that time, they had run out of steam for the day, and some of the teachers as well, mind you. It was tough. It was difficult. So we kind of moved that to the morning with the hopes that they come in fresh, ready to go. We have seen things have looked a great deal different this year than they did last year as far as the purposeful nature of that time. We obviously continue to ramp up our MTSS efforts. We feel like really this year, for the first time in a lot of years, we are aligned. We're working, obviously, the next bullet there with UDL and weaving UDL into our conversations every day. Within MTSS, we're using a lot of different strands. We're looking at discipline. We're looking at attendance. We're looking at the benchmarks through Linkit. We have spreadsheets. We have spreadsheets for spreadsheets, but we meet on a regular basis to go through all of that data and have conversations about, okay, here are the students that are popping up on the radar right now, and then what can we do for them? We had that first meeting last week, middle of the week last week, our first go around where we felt we were far enough along in the year to have enough data that we can identify our first cohort of students that, hey, we're approaching the midpoint of the market period here, and these are students who are struggling, and what can we do? And how can we utilize that time in the morning to have conversations with those students, to ask what they need, Who can they go to have check-ins, check-outs, whatever it may need. So our MTSS efforts continue to grow, and not just the academic side, but also mental health and outside supports where needed as well. And last year, and I've stated before, and last week I visited Phoenixville Middle School. Last week we paid visits to 3 different schools in our area. I'll call them in our area. But we identified middle schools who were similar to us demographically, the schools who were also 7-8 buildings like us, which is kind of unique. When you look at middle schools, there's more 6, 7, 8s or other variations. 7, 8 is kind of unique. So I wanted to find buildings that were similar in structure to us, similar demographics, but had been showing growth in mathematics. This has really kind of been an area of focus for us, certainly since I've been there and probably before I've been there, where the mathematics, much like many schools, is below where we'd like it to be. We visited schools that were similar, but had shown growth. And really we spent a half a day at each of these schools. There are 3 of them that we visited, and really just asked, what were their structures like? What were they doing? How are they helping those students who may have been basic or below basic, as well as those students who may have been, we'll use the word bubble students. They were kind of right there on the cusp. Maybe these students who a couple questions here, or a couple questions there could have made a difference between basic or proficient on the exam. So we came back with some ideas and were able to change some things right away, and some we were able to change over the summer before this school year began as well. So we're hopeful that some of these changes will come into play as we move forward this year. And we do have some teachers last year who were trained, when we look at instructional approaches specific to mathematics, some teachers who were trained in the thinking classroom, which is really, it's a way of instruction that increases the engagement for students. It has students up and moving. So you typically in your minds might picture a math classroom, and what you don't picture typically is students who are up and around and moving and engaging with one another and writing on large whiteboards and thinking out, talking out problems together. But really the thinking classroom is just that. Rather than teacher posing questions or going over something, then practice at your desk, it has the students engaging with one another, engaging with material, talking about the questions, talking about how they're solving it, what their thought process is, that thinking classroom piece, as they're solving those problems. So we had some teachers who piloted that last year, some others who have jumped on this year. Hopefully later in the school year, we can have some data and talk about, what results we're seeing from that. I believe that's all for middle school. I'd just make sure, Frank, if you want to go to the next slide. I think I only had 2. Okay, sorry. You can head back.
Question for you
Yes.
about the advisory time. So how
Yeah.
do students get to the subject area teacher where they need assistance or enrichment?
Yeah, the first step, it's not always them going to somewhere else. Sometimes what they're doing in advisory is having conversations with their advisory is their home.
Right.
So when we talk about other changes we've made, typically in the past we've had 6 homerooms on each team. So in each grade level, there's 3 teams. And in the past, we've had 5 or 6 homerooms in each team. And then in those homerooms, there would be 25 to 28 students in each homeroom. So oftentimes in those homerooms, it became management of students. So we've added 2 homerooms to every team this year. Now in doing so, we've kind of hamstrung ourselves in some other areas when it comes for coverages and things like that. We're utilizing pretty much every available adult in the building who can have a homeroom, and we've assigned them a homeroom. What that has done is taken our homeroom numbers down between 15 and 18 in a homeroom. The idea behind that is that it offers a greater opportunity for those teachers to make connections. We talk about reaching middle school students, any student really. It's about relationships. It's about making connections. And we felt the structure, what we wanted to happen during that, I'll use the word advisory win, what we wanted to happen there, we didn't provide the best environment for that to happen. We wanted teachers to have conversation with students. We wanted teachers to be able to call students up and say, hey, we looked at the Linkit data. It shows you're failing 2 classes right now. Let's pull up and see what assignments you're missing. I can work with you on that. If not, I'll send you over to Mr. Yoder, who's your social studies teacher, and you can ask him the questions that you need to ask. So we have this time here in the morning. And we're asking our homeroom teachers to be the first point of contact there. To answer your question, how do students know if they have to go see it? We ask those teachers to create passes for those students. So they can use our e-hall pass system. If I need to see you during homeroom, I can create a pass for you for tomorrow that you will then see as soon as you log on to your computer that you have a pass to come see me. You show that with your homeroom teacher and you go to see me to get some extra help or to prepare for a test. That's one of the things we saw also with, I think it was our visit to Radnor Middle School last year, was very purposeful help time. Now theirs was just pop in. So you didn't have passes necessarily. If you wanted help for a math test tomorrow, you popped into the math teacher that was on duty the previous day to review those math concepts. So, and we've done some of that as well, where if you're a math teacher on a team, you take your 15 kids in your homeroom, you parse them out to the other 7 homerooms, and that frees you up now to bring kids in and review for a math test the next day.
Just to follow up on that. So in that scenario, a student is not given a choice to go get help. They're getting help
Correct.
if they need the help.
That's correct. Now
So-
there's some that aren't happy about it.
Mhm.
I mean, there's, I mean, and that's the truth. And then again, that's middle school students, right?
Mhm.
I'm angry, so I'm not going to do what you tell me. And I'll go, but I'm not going to engage. And so we,
Mhm.
we have to work through that with some students, and sometimes they get there and sometimes they don't. But in the end, what it comes down to is it's not a punishment. We don't sell this as a punishment. You're losing. If you stay in your homeroom, the expectation on most of those days is that you are focused on looking at your work, pulling up Skyward to see how you're doing your classes. Do you have missing assignments? Do you have any long-term assignments that you need to plan out right now for the coming week? So it's supposed to be a time that is really working on some of those executive functioning skills that are lacking in a lot of 12 to 15-year-old students and maybe beyond as well. So no, it's not.
Yeah, I'm
not-
glad to hear that answer, actually. I know that a lot of kids would just sit there if allowed, so.
No, and we noticed that as well. In the last, like I said, at the end, when we had it at the end of the day, it was a lot. And I walk around and pop in. I know what I wanted to see, and it's not what we did see. And it's not the fault of any of the teachers in the classroom, but there were students who were just completely disengaged. They were spent at that time, and it was, I've got a half hour until I go home now.
Right.
By having in the morning, it's a half hour of homeroom, then I have the rest of my day.
Are students able to use that time to just finish up homework if they were
Yes.
not
Yes,
struggling in anything? So they could plan on that
Sure.
morning. Oh,
because
I'm
they're
gonna have 30 more minutes to do.
absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a large percentage of our and I will also say that this is also time students who are in band, who are in chorus, who are in orchestra, who receive gifted services, who receive learning support services. If they need time or are requested by their band teacher, by their gifted teacher, then this is time for them to go there as well, because we have several students who don't fall behind, who keep up with their studies, who are achieving at a high level. So they may not need that, I'll use the term study hall time, if you will. They
Right.
may not need that like some others will. So,
Great. Okay. Also, going back to the Linkit data.
Yeah.
And you were saying that like on there that the Linkit data was basically predictive in math,
yes.
but in ELA, it was not.
No, it is. Predictive in ELA as well, and
Oh,
science.
Okay. Well, the way that was worded was just that the PSSA scores were lower or what was it? Yeah, meaning that, that
Oh.
Linkit maybe didn't
Yeah.
identify the
And
PSSA scores that well.
and to that I will say this, and that does happen as well. The Linkit, we run kind of a modified schedule when we give our Linkit benchmarks. We run like a 1-hour delay schedule. It doesn't typically take them 1 hour to complete their Linkit benchmarks. It's usually around 40 minutes ish. We'll give for that, and they're kind of spaced out through the year. Students, I think, find it much easier to sit down and to stay focused for that amount of time and to put an effort into that. What we do see when PSSAs roll around is that becomes a struggle for many. Now they are sitting at a 2-hour block of time, 1.5 to 2 hour block of time. For many, it takes at least that much time, if not longer. For some, even though they know they have as much time as they need, they will finish it in 10 minutes. It becomes color in the dots and connect the dots time. It's not something that, so the battle we face there is how to, and And, you know, for our eighth graders, for example, for our eighth graders, it's May. I've got a month where I'm testing 3 days a week in this month for hour and a half, 2 hours a day. And I'm going to the high school in a month, and none of these results mean a thing for me as far as, you know, my grade in this class. So there's that constant battle. So I would anticipate that we will from time to time see that on the benchmarks, there's perhaps some higher performance because it's an easier ask of students than the PSSAs are.
So you don't suspect there's anything wrong with the TDAs or any of that, any types of benchmarks they're using?
No, I don't, because they're standards based. I mean, what we see in Linkit is the questions they ask are based on what they're going to see on the PSSA as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one more question.
Yeah.
As far as the thinking classroom, that pilot, well, two questions about that topic.
Mhm.
So does that mean that's something that's going to go forward? And whether or not it does, is that really just a methodology of like lesson planning, or is there actual different instructional materials to use, or what is that exactly? Is it just
Well, I don't know if there's as much different materials that are being used as far as the instructional practices that are being used in the classroom. So it's just a much higher degree of student and get purposeful student engagement that's
Mhm.
taking place. You know, it's taking the time to allow students to interact with one another, to talk about math, to talk about how they're solving and approaching math problems. And in doing so, you know, students might learn a bit from one another about how they're approaching their math. So, you know, as far as different materials, you know, we provided all those teachers with some large whiteboards because some of them have 3, 4, 5 large whiteboards in a room, and then they can workstations. They go from station to station around the room as they work on problems. But it's very active. You walk into the classroom, teachers who are practicing that, you walk in, and it might be 5 minutes of students in their seats, and then the rest of the time as they're up moving around, they're talking to one another. Some would walk in and go, "What's going on here?" But in reality, it's constructive what's going on here.
So is it going to move forward, and what's happening? with
Yeah,
it?
I think, you know, we're sampling it this year. We have the folks who we kind of introduced to it toward the end of last year, and then some others who have joined them in practice. It's not, they don't do it every day. It's not something, we don't walk in those classrooms every single day. Kids are up moving around. But it's another tool that they're using. And the hope is that as this year goes on, we can circle back to those teachers and say, how is this working? What's the feedback? Have you seen any results as far as student performance than you did, you know, maybe earlier in the year when you were just introducing this model? So more data yet to be collected with that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear just how that works in the
And
end.
I'd love,
or,
you know, I invite anyone who wants to kind of see that in action to come in anytime you want. We can arrange for visits to those classrooms and check it out.
Yeah, Mr. Stoltzfus, if I can add, I know Dr. Soder and I were invited in last year to see the group that was piloting it, and it was very powerful. It's really typically a word question that is multi-layered, and then you break students into small groups, and they don't have the answer, they just have the problem, and the students collaborate on the solution, and it takes a while. I mean, it's typically about a half an hour that they're collaborating on different solutions. It's very powerful. So when I saw it last year, I really liked the engagement and what I saw.
As opposed to, you know, Johnny, come up and solve number 3 on the board. Jenny, come up and solve number 6 on the board. So now you have those 2 students engaged in solving those problems on the board. And the others in the class may or may not be fully watching them and how they're doing it. In this way, it's not teacher posing a question, then someone tries to answer. If they get it right, fantastic. If they get it wrong, the teacher says, no, here's how you do it. It's here's the problem. Teacher steps back and lets students, again, thinking classroom, as you might imagine, think about how to solve this problem, work together on solving that problem. The idea being that there's more learning that takes place in that kind of environment.
In your visits to other middle schools, what's something that jumped out at you like, wow, that's a great idea. We can do that here, either immediately or next year?
Yeah, well, one of the things that they seem to have is common planning time for teachers in similar subjects at grade level. We didn't have that until this year. We had they had planning as a team So and they still do. And then their personal prep, every teacher's personal prep was also at the same time as their team, which not very useful as for your subject matter. So this year, they still have their 3 of the 6 day cycle with their team to plan out things they want to do as a team and to have visits from counselors and other teachers who need to see them. But their personal preps have all been aligned by grade level and subject. So all 7th grade math teachers have their personal preps the same period. We didn't mandate that they had to get together at that time because that's their personal prep. But we said, if you wanted to get together, if you wanted to discuss an issue you're seeing, you all gave a common assessment and you're noticing, my kids bomb the word problem section of this test. Get together and talk about how you want to approach that as a group now moving forward, how you want to hit on teaching that differently. Do you want to circle back and revisit that and reteach it to these students? So they have that opportunity now this year to get together by grade level, by department, if they so desire, which we didn't have last year.
While Dr. Smith is coming up here, some of our middle school teachers will be visiting Phoenixville for the purpose of also seeing thinking classrooms in another school. They're having an event.
Good evening. The highlights for elementary are fairly broad, considering we have 5 buildings, and I'm just going to keep my comments at that broad level. But truly, there was an increase in some in our ELA scores for 3rd grade. And as Dr. Soder said, we increased the mathematics scores at every grade. Science continues to remain high throughout all 5 elementary buildings. But as the board knows and most of the public knows, our scores are still not at pre-COVID levels. And it's an interesting comment where maybe there's a new norm, I don't know. But when comparing our current scores to pre-COVID, they're still not up to pre-COVID levels. I'm going to say off the top of my, off the top of my head, I'm going to say in the vast majority of areas, yes. Some of the things that were introduced last year that are impacting what we do this year, you have heard it from both presentations, but Linkit is a benchmark system that we are utilizing. And again, it's to gauge student performance. And then what we have found at the elementary level is that Linkit does mirror performance on a PSSA. That was one of the things I don't think we thought about, but as we went back to look at the data, it stood out pretty clearly. I think one area that was a little off was maybe 4th grade was a little off from the Linkit data, but vast majority of students, the way they performed on Linkit is how they performed on PSSA. One of the things I think is really important, PSSA is but one data point, and it's very important to us at the elementary level that we measure growth, because our expectation is kids will grow a year minimally. And so when we start to look at goals, it's really to set up like, how do we make sure students are growing from year to year? And so the data informs our instruction, which then informs areas of growth. Franklin, the next slide. So once again, these are going to be broad, and you've heard it at the previous 2 presentations. There's really 4 buckets that we're concentrating on. And really those buckets are UDL, Universal Design Learning. I'm going to put Linkit and assessments together because really when you look at those 2 areas, we're looking to say what is informing our instruction. How are our students performing on standardized benchmarks? What are our ongoing assessments? Linkit can help us provide that. Interventions, whether those interventions are through IXL, interventions both on the high end, low end, it depends on where we're at. We also are utilizing AimsWeb, which has been around for a number of years, but we're expanding the use of AimsWeb to general ed students as well. And of course, IXL. And so the 4 buckets, UDL, Linkit, assessments, and then really looking at MTSS. And I think it's important to kind of break that out just for a second. UDL is really looking at our instructional practices. Linkit and assessments are informing our instruction. And then MTSS is how are we looking at all 3 tiers of students. We are really good at the elementary level at looking at and identifying tier 3 students, coming up with interventions for tier 3 students. a mile long. MTSS is forcing us to look at our language and looking at all 3 tiers. And really, just because you happen to be a tier 1 student doesn't mean that you don't need any help or assistance. And what that leads, when you start to look at goals, you're going to see that they mirror the district goals. But when you look at student success, you're really looking at the academic performance of students. How are we measuring that academic success? And there's really, what are you going to do if the student's already mastered the content? What are you going to do if the student hasn't mastered the content? And so those are some areas that when you look at 2 words of student success, it's really encompassing the entire instructional program. As far as student well-being, I'm gonna put those 2 together, student well-being and safety. I think you've heard it in many different presentations, but really relationships and student well-being go hand in hand. And in order for the basic needs to be met, those are things that at the elementary level that stand out a little bit more for us. So we look at those basic needs. Are they being met? Are they prepared to learn? My teachers are prepared to teach, but are students coming to us prepared to learn? And I think there's a myriad of answers to that one question. But specifically at the elementary, it stands out in a very evident way. And so you can, again, go back to a PSSA and look at a score, but the number doesn't tell you the story about the student. And so as far as looking at goals, every building has instructional goals. Every building has safety goals. They're not the big picture goals. They are the intimate details that we see with students. Ed's not performing where he should be. What's the story? And so, every principal, every teacher could tell you the story of the child that's under their care. So it can get lost in the overall picture of assessment and instruction. And it's really important, especially for us at the elementary level, and then it's really true at every level. We need to know the student's story. What do they need? Are basic needs being met? If not, what can we do to support them? If they're performing at a high range, how do we continue to push them so that that year's growth is at a high range? As far as our instruction, really at the elementary level, focusing in on what we do on a day-to-day basis, but formalizing it a little bit more. What are we teaching? What are we learning? Reinforce that assessment drives instruction. We've said that for a number of years, but now that you have some assessments that are truly linked to our instructional practices through the lens of either UDL or MTSS, are we truly using data to inform instruction? So those conversations have been plenty. And then something that seems common sense, but really looking at skills-based instruction and not necessarily an overall reading level, but what skill in the reading level is the student mastered or still needs to practice at. And then finally, something that I think is lost, and that's professional development. The last 3 years, having the ability to get teachers together, depending on grade level, has been nil. If we're going to be completely honest about it, whether it's sub failures, and you could once again come up with a myriad of reasons over the last 2 years, 3 years, but really a concerted effort to make sure that teachers have the ability to get together and talk about instruction and to feed off of one another what we're doing that's positive, what we're doing that works well, and also areas that we need to grow in. So it's a concerted effort on all principals this year to look at the professional development, work in concert with Dr. Soder's office, the 3 supervisors, and to really get teachers time. It's the one commodity Jackie cannot afford us anymore, and that's the gift of time. I don't think it's a budget item. But that's a quick overview of the elementary, but I know you might have some specifics. So I'll open it up to the floor.
What are some things that we've brought in when you're looking at the ELA scores increase for 3rd grade? And we see mathematics scored for every grade through 3 through 6. But so what are some interventions or supports that we've brought in this year to help address some of these struggles? And with the growth thing, I'm very excited that a majority of our students have grown a year. That's huge. I'm glad we have the internal assessments to be able to see that. But what are some things that we're going to do to try to hit some of the other benchmarks?
Honestly, I'm going to tell you right now, it's time on task, and it's the ability to have students in front of you, without interruptions, but actually looking at a block of time, the 75-minute block of math. What are we doing that's purposeful and meaningful throughout that 75-minute block? And so when you go about teaching and learning and assessment drive instruction, it has to be meaningful and it has to be productive. I don't think there's a magic program that we're bringing in. It's about what is the skill the child is mastered, what is the skill that the child hasn't mastered, and then providing either small group or skill specific instruction at their level. We want all kids at grade level for reading and writing and math. And when those skills aren't mastered, what are we doing differently within the room? And it's really about skills-based instruction. I think that's the focus that we've been talking about. I don't think it's new, but like everything else, if you're not talking about it, if you're not putting it front and center, it becomes one of those things, oh yeah, or you assume that the previous teacher is doing it, or a lot of assumptions there. When the data is staring at you saying what skill is lacking, you're able to focus in your instruction and form your group based on what kids are performing on at that particular skill.
Yeah, you talked about the need for time for the teachers, and I kind of asked this before, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself because I cannot recall the answer. But how often do teachers, especially young teachers, get to just go sit in another classroom and observe a teacher and learn from them and see different instructional techniques and things like that, so that, to help in that manner?
Great question, and I think it's one of those things. And every building will approach this differently. But we have actually made a concerted effort to get staff out in front of other teachers, not in an evaluative means, but more of collegial growth and professional growth, just by able to get out, whether it's science teachers going into the STEAM room to see the setup of those lessons, and then being able to translate that into their discipline or what they're doing subject specific in the elementary setting. That's like a very small snippet. I think each of the building principals are being very prescriptive in how we utilize time. We have common planning time. We don't take common planning time every day, because then you're defeating the purpose of having common planning time. However, when you purposefully and prescriptively ask teachers to go to this grade level, that grade level, then offer choice within what they can see, I think that's the approach that we're undertaking this year. The other thing, we have a robust mentoring program at the first year, 2, 3, and they are required to go out and see other teachers. And so that's, I think, something that gets a little bit lost in our induction program, because it's not just 1 year, but it carries on. And part of that program is getting out and looking at master teachers.
Does that mentoring program also include an experienced teacher coming to see a younger teacher without any kind of evaluation or anything like that, just for help?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. And I'm just going to speak for East Vincent. I have my 6th grade teachers going to see master teachers on Thursday. You know who those master teachers are? Our 1st grade team. Different kids, different issues, they're bigger kids, etc. However, if you want to see master teachers go to a kindergarten room, 1st grade room, specifically in 2nd grade, management. Those folks are masters of management of time. There's 420 minutes in a day. Slice it up however you want. Require me to do A, B, C, D. I have 420 minutes to get it in. How do I best utilize the 420 for instructional purposes? So that's happening in each of our buildings, and it could be different. It depends on the principal and the focus of that building, but those are the things that are important to get teachers out to see one another.
Okay, thanks.
I know the story with PSSAs statewide and nationally is that students are not performing up to pre-COVID levels, but if you're seeing through PVAS and our other assessments that students are growing, I'd hope that's the story we keep focusing on, because that's, we'll never be able to fully understand or explain the COVID slip, but if our kids are back and growing now.
Just to accentuate that, and you could get all 5 elementary principals up there and they'll have a similar story. Coming out of COVID, I shared with the board the other night that we had 37 students reading at a mid-kindergarten level. And then my first grade team knocked it out with mass supports that we utilized from the board. Thank you. But those support systems, we were able to whittle those 37 students down to 3. And as they enter 3rd grade. And when I'm looking at tier 3 supports and I have a 0 going into 3rd grade, my hat goes off to the team and the teachers that did all that hard work. And each building has those stories. And the 3 kids we're talking about, they have a specific story that we know and are trying to accommodate for as they go into 3rd grade.
Yeah.
So
And, you know, I hope for teachers morale, principals morale, but that's what we're focusing on. That the kids are growing. You know, you look at those scores, it's like, wow, why aren't we up to pre-COVID level? But if our kids are growing, that's what matters.
at the end of the day, when parents come to me and they want to know how their child's performing, I can give them the numbers, but at the end of it, are their kids happy to be in school? Are they growing socially? Are they growing academically? And if not, why? What can we do together? Because it's not a one person or one program. It's really about conversations, relationships, and what do we need to do to get your specific child to where they need to be or push them forward. This is this isn't a hearing piece for the game. Someone will be able to give you the score. There you go.
And if I could just, I'll just add one component there. And I know Dr. Smith was talking about professional development. And I'm going into year 3 as superintendent. And 2 weeks ago was the first time I experienced where we were able to pull teachers out to do work on curriculum during the school day because we had enough subs to do that. So in the last 2 years, there was none of that professional development where we could pull teachers together in order to do the necessary professional development that we need. So we haven't arrived yet, but things are much better in that regard, that we're able to offer those opportunities to teachers that we couldn't do the last 3 years.
I just want to say thank you for everyone that came up and spoke and presented tonight. I just wanted to say that we were looking tonight for an executive summary of our information. The data is available on tonight's agenda for anybody to view. Dr. Soder is more than happy to take questions on specific data points and address any questions via email or phone call. Please feel free to email the board with any questions or concerns. I do want to also just state that we are going to have presentations on Linkit, Aimsweb, and IXL later within the year after we get 2 data points for that. So we can really keep a close eye and keep track of, how our students are growing and doing on the test, especially since they're so much related to PSSAs and Keystones also, but also how our teachers are using in the classroom and for assessments and for the skill education and such. So we really, really appreciate that. And we'd love to hear more about the thinking classroom and get some information and data on that in the future also. So thank you guys again. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Sabo. Finance, Building and Grounds Committee, Mr. Harmonos, please.
You have to bear with me since we have no power. Yeah, sure. Where's the code of words? There. Okay, Finance, Building and Grounds Committee. Tonight, I think we've got a budget timeline to present. Jackie, do you want to review that or want me to go through it?
Sure, I'm happy to do that, Mr.
Go
Hermanos.
Thank you.
Dr. Cecilia, would you mind putting that up on the screen? And in the essence of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I just wanted to share the PDE came out with the Act 1 index this year. It's probably higher than I've ever seen it. It's at 5.3%. That means we're not allowed to raise our taxes more than 5.3%. I'll assure you that we will not bring you a proposal that includes a 5.3% tax increase. As we work through the budget timeline, the primary election date really drives most of the deadlines here. There is some chatter at the Senate level that they may want to change the primary election date. It's April 23rd right now. So this calendar is the most conservative and it will encompass any primary election date. So let's just put it that way. We will not have to come back and change this. So we will bring to you at the November board meeting a resolution stating that we will not raise taxes above the index. We usually bring that to you in January. We'll do it early and in November this year so that we'll meet any of the timelines that we need. And as in the past, we'll be bringing enrollment projections. Brad is working diligently on those in November, and then that really drives our staffing. So if you don't mind flipping to the next page, Dr. Cicito, we'll work throughout January and February, definitely with our internal meetings with Dr. Stout and all of our budget managers. We'll bring staffing recommendations to you in March. And then you can see where all the individual public meetings are listed to present the budget. I will add, last year we added 3 individual finance committee meetings. This calendar also shares 3 individual finance committee meeting dates. They're not published as far as advertised yet, so we can work with that and, add or subtract whatever the committee and the board want to do. With final approval really, scheduled for hopefully in May. So that's where we are. We'll post the timeline onto the website. On the website, we'll share with our administrative staff. And I'm happy to entertain any questions regarding the timeline. I feel like we're just kicking off this year and we're talking about the 24-25 budget already, but
In the note section on the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
could we note the 2 days that we have scheduled for our town hall?
oh, absolutely. Sure.
Since we have those dates scheduled for
Yes,
the year,
I'm happy
let's,
to do that.
I don't know that they need to be in the document itself or in the timeline itself, but in that note
Yep,
section. on the
we can have 2 notes.
Yes, because I was wondering if one of those town halls could be specifically sort of slated for budgetary issues or, just maybe, encouraged.
Right, the spring is probably, it would probably be helpful in the spring because we'll have gotten through,
Mhm.
much of the year. I have to see when that is. I have to check the timeline of that against the budget development. Ooh. April
Okay.
1st. Ooh. Yeah, that's, Michael. That's a little late, but we'll work on that. Thank you.
Could you, I've read this somewhere and I can't remember if it's in here or somewhere else. The Act One index, can you
Mhm.
just give us a quick summary on how that's determined?
Sure. PDE actually calculates what the Act One index is. And I'm happy I can share in Boardline what the actual calculation is, but they're really taking average of the economic status in the state, economic indices, as well as teacher salaries. So it's kind of it's an inflationary index really. So it's kind of combining I want to call it the real world economics with what's happening in school districts too across the state. And combines that and then says, you cannot raise your taxes above a certain amount without going out for a vote. So it would be an action item on a ballot and the community would literally have to vote to increase taxes above that amount, unless you qualified for specific exceptions, and those are delineated in the code.
Yeah, and how do teacher salaries,
It's a
figure into
historical,
that?
it's
like the
part of
entire state,
Mhm.
their salaries?
historical, statewide average weekly wage, that they call it.
Okay, so it's the pensions?
Well, it's the state, what we report our salaries, obviously,
Yeah. Right.
our salaries are reported.
Mhm.
So they're pulling that data to calculate a portion, it's a portion of the calculation.
I'm just curious to understand, so if teacher salaries are high or, lots of increases, would that make that index go higher? Or how would that affect?
It does,
that?
but I will say that the way that I've seen it work in the past, if there is inflation in general in the economy,
Mhm.
everything's going up. It's not
Okay.
just teacher salaries going up and nothing else is going up. So really, it's just really part of the inflation that you're
Okay.
seeing in the economy.
I see. We're just using that as an indicator.
Right.
Okay, but if you could send us the specifics, that would be
Absolutely.
great.
Sure.
Erie versus
No, actually.
No, it's different. Okay.
There's a base Act One index.
Okay.
And then it is adjusted based on your poverty levels. So for example, Owen J. Roberts will have a lower Act One index than a school that has a higher poverty index. They will have a higher Act One index. They'll be able to tax higher. It's, I know, which doesn't make
So
sense, does it?
If you have less money in your community, you can tax more.
That's why I said it doesn't really make sense, but
Aye, aye,
that's
aye.
right, right.
Any other questions for the BFG committee? All right. Ms. Chairman?
Thank you very much. We are going to move to Legislative and Policy Committee. Dr. Melmezek.
All right, we have 6 items on the agenda tonight. Agenda items 4.01 through 4.04 are being discussed tonight due to amendments to the Pennsylvania Breach of Personal Information Notification Act. Act 151 was amended for definitions, notification methods, and timeline requirements. And it was added, an additional policy requirements were added regarding storage of data and transmission. So item 4.01, we have policy 800, which is records management. And with it as a records retention and disposition schedule. That schedule remains unchanged, but the policy was revised to incorporate some general references to security measures and the such. Any questions for anybody? There's really only 2 sections that were really changed under delegation of responsibility, I believe. And yeah. Good. These are pretty dry, so they should, you know. I don't expect any controversy tonight. Okay.
Oh, come on, I had a field day with these.
Yeah, yeah. Our IT person down there was having the best of days when we discussed these. But does she have any discussion of it tonight?
No, because I think we made the changes that made it make sense more
Yes.
so than the recommended language that was coming out for
All right.
us to adopt.
Then do I have a motion to move this forward to the full board?
So moved.
Second? It has for
Second.
you.
Yes. This is just for 800, right? We're just talking about 800. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Second.
Okay, thank you. Okay, item 4.02, policy 830, data governance, storage and security. This is a new policy recommended by the PSBA, and it was developed to comply with the new requirements of the act. All of it is new, so any concerns or questions when we read over it? These are all like given out last month, so all of us have had a chance to read them twice. No questions? A motion to move on to the full board?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Item 4.03, policy 8301. The security of computerized personal information / breach notification. This is also a new policy. And it, you know, includes a lot of definitions for things I don't understand, like determination, encryption, redaction. It also it mentions that upon the determination that we had a breach, the district is required to provide notice within 7 business days.
Do you want me to give a detailed description of exactly what redaction includes?
I do, but I don't think the board does. So, April, do we have a motion to?
Does anybody want, I don't want to stop. If anybody wants to hear more. Okay. So moved.
Second.
Okay. All right. Item 4.04 is a regulation. It's a new regulation. It's regulation 830.1A. Notification of breach of computerized personal information. It describes the procedures on how the district will notify individuals if there is a breach, which of course it won't be, right? Motion to move forward?
Well, I guess
Oh, good.
one thing that didn't occur to me before when we were reviewing this was the number 2 says telephone notice. Do we use text notices? Because, you know, like a lot of people really are looking at text message notifications more than listening to the.
Yes, isn't the
It-
same.
Yeah, is it considered the same for the purposes of this policy, or is this really telephone notice like a phone call? Do we know?
Doesn't need to be specific.
Really based off of the amount of people that we're contacting. So with telephone, we wouldn't really be, I guess we would be texting if it's a small amount of people, but it would be, and if it's a large amount, like parents, we do have the texting feature available. So, I mean, we could definitely change it to telephone and or text.
Would that be a useful change?
Can telephone just, doesn't that cover text or not?
Yeah, and
guess we
telephone could
probably
be,
would
it's not
do
necessarily
email
voice
more.
call. Telephone could be described as,
Email number 3 would probably be our usual method, you
yes.
think?
Email would be our usual method.
Okay.
We also go through, there's also mail for if it's a vendor that's the issue, could be through mail as well. Like actual US mail. Sorry.
Good. What's a regulation? So we just acknowledge it, right?
Sure, yes. I mean, if changes are needed, we can make the change now and we could just, we can continue. We don't have to bring it back. I mean, my suggestion would be to keep it as is.
Yeah, I think when I see telephone, I think telephone or text myself. Okay.
All right, thanks for me being pedantic. I moved to
No
move this to the full board, or we don't even need to
No,
just
no.
acknowledge it. right?
Acknowledge.
Okay. All right. Item 4.05 is a policy 006 meetings. Revisions to this policy appear under the section on voting, pages 4 to 6, I believe. Under number 1, which is actions that require the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the full membership of the board. There's 2 additional items which include incurring temporary debt and changing textbooks without the recommendation of the superintendent. I think that's a major.
And these were recommended from the state level, right?
We're
Yes,
PSBA.
yes.
PSBA.
These aren't changes. They're PSBA recommendations through the state.
Good.
I
Any
I have a-
questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
There was one line that was removed about merging with a larger school district from the 2/3 vote. And I don't know where it went. So is that like no longer a possibility, or is that just a majority vote?
It's majority now, I believe, isn't it?
It says majority.
Yeah, that would be majority.
Seems like a pretty big move to go on a 5-4 vote. So I'm not super comfortable with that.
Yeah,
And
so it's,
then rewritten though as AE. It's AE. Yeah, but then they
Yeah,
re-added it at the
it's
bottom.
detailed out in those 3. So they, instead of saying like the district, it's approving or denying charter schools, approving or denying. Yeah, that is different from combining with a different.
Well, it says establishing joint schools or departments. Isn't that also a similar?
I was speaking
That's
about
within?
item number R on the draft. It says combining or reorganizing into a larger school district, and it's struck.
It's not listed above under 2/3, correct?
Well, it's struck from the 2/3, I believe.
Majority.
Right, and so the footnote reference is 36.
Oh, crossed off.
Somebody who has access to search and find, can you find any other footnote references to 36 in the amended document?
Mine doesn't work.
So 36 is now a footnote with no main content?
Well, we would be deleting 36 with that one as well. I don't see any other 36 within the document.
Yeah, so that, yeah, exactly. That's the question is it something that's covered somewhere else in school code and that's why it's recommended to be removed from here?
Whatever 24 PS 224.
Sounds like we need clarification before we.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds
let's-
like we should
let's-
hold this one at the committee level.
We'll bring this back to leadership and then bring it back next month. Sounds good? Okay.
Thank you.
You don't want to just, on a whim?
Yeah.
I think there's a reason we just don't, it's not explained yet.
It seems like a very remote possibility, but
If she has a thought here.
We'll get clarification on yours.
Yeah. It's not like we're trying to do a runaround and combine with Phoenixville. Yeah. Their taxes are so low. Yeah, that's right. We just don't do, we won't do Westchester at least. Given that, let's move on to item 4.06, policy 216.1, supplemental discipline records. There was a lot of green in this revision, but it didn't really change much to my understanding. Is that correct, Mr. Bentman?
That is correct. We are talking about adjudicated delinquent students that are delinquent, adjudicated. So this is very specific and not used quite often.
and just give me the definition of an adjudicated delinquent.
Yeah, so a student who's in court systems and is under the authority of a case where the judge rules on a student based off of serious incident outside of school or in school.
Is it limited to minors or is it any student?
Minor as in like 18 or?
Yeah.
I think student within the school building. So no matter what age the student is, if they're on our records, on our rolls.
It's like legally is an adjudicated delinquent necessarily a minor? I think if they're not a minor, then they're an adult.
Well, if the student's 18, then what are we?
We're still sharing records with other districts if kids are transferring and things like that. So we even, I mean, if a student is on our rolls and our student, we would follow this policy based off that.
But I think that the concern is because we specifically state adjudicated delinquent and not, and if they're 18 or 18 to 22 for some of our students, does this policy still hold if?
Doesn't mean juvenile, but there are things that do say juvenile probation office. But
It says like including but not limited to in some cases.
This is state courts definition, not a school district definition.
Which definition are you talking of? Which one?
Delinquent.
Just doing
Where
a
do you-
quick Google search. It does look like adjudicated just refers to a minor.
So are there other records policies, I guess, then on a student who's not a minor?
Well, if they're not a minor, they might be, then it wouldn't be adjudicated, but they would be charged as an adult. So the adult offense would, you know, I don't know, I think it's semantics.
Well, I mean, we do have students up to age 22, so it's not
Mhm.
that we couldn't get a student.
Yeah, I don't know what the actual wording is if the student is not, if it's an adult, right? So I don't
All right, so
I don't have that answer.
do we need to hold this one in committee then too until
Sure.
we find out? Because yeah, we wouldn't want to pass a partial solution that doesn't cover our students ages 19 to 22.
That was my question was just based on, what's the difference between, how does this policy affect a minor versus an adult? And so that's what wasn't really clear in my reading of it.
Yeah, I get it. I understand. I don't understand it either.
Well, 4 out of 6 ain't bad. It's more than we got last month, so it's progression.
I think it's worth noting that changing policies at school boards should be low and slow and painful because if it's
And-
too fast, you're probably not doing your job right. So thank you, David.
Yes. Well, Madam President, that's it.
That's up to the committee chair.
Sure, I'll take a public question on the budget schedule.
Does anybody have any questions from the community?
Oh, God, I don't want my germs on it. All right, so Colleen Blute, North Coventry Township. I'm not here to give you any grief about curriculum or any of that stuff.
Okay, so
We're doing just-
we are taking questions about the curriculum presentation, the buildings,
Oh.
guidance, finance,
This is,
and labor and the LNP plans. It's a working session. That's our,
well, you need
policy
to
for
know
working
about
session.
this because this is.
can I encourage you to send me the picture with an email? And I can take a look at it and respond to you that way?
Sure, I'll send it to you right now.
We can do that. Thank you. Colin. Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.